Wyoming Territory, 1879. Flames licked the night sky, turning the Blackwood Ranch into a hellscape of orange and black. Jesse Blackwood, blood seeping from a bullet wound in his shoulder, dragged himself toward the burning main house. The heat seared his face, sweat mixing with blood and soot as he crawled across the yard toward what remained of his life. Noah, his voice was lost in the roar of the fire, in the thunder of hoofbeats as riders circled the property. Noah. The riders were shadows against the flames, faceless men with rifles and torches, whooping and hollering as they watched Jesse's world burn. Their leader sat tall on a white stallion, his silhouette unmistakable even in the chaos. Matthias Kane, enforcer for the railroad magnate Cornelius Wade. Jesse had known they would come eventually. Eleanor had warned him before she died. They'll never stop Jesse, not until they have the water. He reached the edge of the porch now, a crumbling inferno. Through the haze of smoke and pain, he could see his destination. The charred remains of Eleanor's study, where she'd kept her research journals. If anything survived, it would be in the iron strongbox beneath the floorboards. The knowledge it contained was worth more than gold, worth dying for, worth killing for. A bullet splintered the wood beside his head. Jesse rolled, drawing his Colt and returning fire in one fluid motion. One of the riders tumbled from his horse with a cry that was swallowed by the night. 5 shots left. 5 bullets between him and certain death. "The boy's got to be in there somewhere," one of the riders shouted. "Find him." Jesse's heart seized. Noah. His 5-year-old son was hidden in the root cellar just as they'd practiced. The entrance was concealed beneath the woodpile behind the house, but if these men were determined enough, no time left for stealth. Jesse staggered to his feet, ignoring the burning agony in his shoulder, and made a desperate dash for the study window. Glass shattered around him as he crashed through, landing hard on the floor of what had once been Eleanor's sanctuary. The heat was unbearable, smoke filling his lungs as he clawed at the floorboards, finding the loose one by touch alone. His fingers closed around the handle of the strongbox just as the ceiling beam above him cracked. "He's in there!" A voice from outside, followed by more gunfire. Jesse clutched the strongbox to his chest and looked around frantically. The front door was blocked by flames, the window he had entered through now covered by armed men. He was trapped. 2 months earlier, Eleanor Blackwood had sat at her desk in this very room, carefully transcribing her findings into a leather-bound journal. "Jesse," she'd called to him, excitement lighting her blue eyes. "Come look at this." He'd stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, peering at the microscope she'd ordered all the way from Boston. "What am I looking at, Ellie?" "The water sample from the North Creek. See those mineral structures? I've never seen anything like them. They're reacting to the blood sample. Reacting how it's attacking the diseased cells, Jesse. Only the diseased ones." She looked up at him, her face flushed with discovery. "This could change everything. If I can isolate the compound." 3 days later, Mrs. Harrington, the bishop's wife, had brought tea to celebrate Noah's 5th birthday. Eleanor drank it gratefully. By nightfall, she was doubled over in agony. By morning, she was gone. Noah hadn't spoken a word since. Jesse shook away the memory. Focus. He needed to focus. The roof would collapse any minute. He tucked the strongbox into his shirt and crawled toward the back wall where Eleanor's large oak desk stood partially shielded from the flames. If he could get behind it, there was a chance, small but real, that he could reach the back door. A crash from the front of the house told him the riders had broken through. Jesse raised his Colt, 4 shots left now. Make them count. The first man through the door took a bullet to the chest. The second dove for cover as Jesse fired again, missing, but buying precious seconds. He scrambled behind the desk, coughing as the smoke filled his lungs. The back door was 10 feet away, engulfed in flames. No way out. 3 shots left. "Blackwood," Kane's voice carried over the roar of the fire. "It's over. Tell us where the boy is, and we'll make it quick." Jesse's vision blurred. Blood loss and smoke were taking their toll. He would die here in the ruins of the life he'd built with Eleanor. But Noah, God, please let Noah stay hidden. Let him survive this. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, and that's when he saw her. Through the shattered window at the back of the study, illuminated by the dancing flames, a woman bound and thrown across the back of a horse. Her long black hair hung down, nearly touching the ground, but Jesse could see her face in profile. High cheekbones, copper skin, and eyes as dark and fierce as a mountain storm. He knew her, though they'd never spoken. Nadia Youngblood, the Shoshone woman who'd come to Willow Creek 6 months ago. Rumors called her a witch, a healer who knew the secrets of plants and waters. She'd been arrested last week for allegedly poisoning Reverend Collins with her devil's brew. Now she was here a prisoner like him. Their eyes met across the burning yard, a moment of recognition between two souls marked for destruction. In that instant, Jesse saw something in her gaze. Not defeat, but defiance. A will to survive that matched his own. "Check the cellar," Kane barked to his men. "The boy's got to be there." No, Jesse's blood turned to ice. They knew about the cellar. They'd find Noah. 3 bullets. 3 chances. He raised his gun, aiming not at Kane or his men, but at the ropes binding Nadia's wrist to the saddle horn. The shot would need to be perfect. Miss by an inch, and he'd kill her instead of freeing her. Jesse steadied his breathing just as his father had taught him long ago. "Breathe out when you squeeze the trigger, son. Let the gun become part of your hand." He exhaled and fired. The rope snapped. Nadia didn't hesitate. She rolled from the horse landing in a crouch despite her bound ankles. With remarkable speed, she worked her hands free and began moving toward the woodpile, toward Noah's hiding place. She knew. Somehow she knew where his son was hidden. "She's loose." One of Kane's men spotted her. "The witch is loose." 2 bullets left. Jesse fired through the window, dropping the man who had spotted Nadia. His last bullet took down another rider, moving to intercept her. Empty gun. No more chances. The oak desk splintered as bullets tore into it. Jesse pressed himself against the floor, the strong box digging into his chest. The smoke was overwhelming now, the heat unbearable. He couldn't see Nadia anymore through the flames and smoke. Had she reached Noah? Would she save him? Or was this all for nothing? The ceiling gave way above him with a deafening crack. Jesse rolled, but not fast enough. A burning beam struck him across the back, pinning him to the floor. The pain was excruciating, but he hardly felt it. His mind was with Noah, with the strange woman who was now his son's only hope. As consciousness began to slip away, Jesse thought he heard a child's scream cut through the roar of the fire. Noah, or just his mind playing cruel tricks. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the strongbox knocked open by his fall. Eleanor's journal spilled out pages, fluttering in the hot wind, her precious research turning to ash before his eyes. Then nothing. Jesse woke to pain and darkness. For one disorienting moment, he thought he was still trapped in the burning house. Then his eyes adjusted, and the stone walls of a jail cell materialized around him. Willow Creek's jailhouse. He was alive. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Fire shot through his back and shoulder. Someone had bandaged his wounds, but they'd done a poor job of it. Or perhaps his injuries were simply too severe for frontier medicine. "Lie still, Blackwood. You'll tear those stitches." Sheriff Robert Sawyer sat on a stool outside the cell, his weathered face grim in the lamplight. A tall man with iron gray hair and a mustache to match Sawyer had been law in Willow Creek for 15 years. He wasn't known for compassion, but neither was he cruel. Just a man doing a job few wanted. "Noah," Jesse croaked, his throat raw from smoke. "My son." "Ain't seen him," Sawyer said, his expression giving nothing away. "Found you half dead and in what was left of your house. No sign of the boy." Jesse closed his eyes, fighting back despair. Had Nadia reached him? Or had Kane's men found the cellar, the Shoshone woman he managed? She was there. Sawyer's eyes narrowed slightly. Nadia Youngblood. She was in jail here until yesterday. Escaped somehow. "She was at my ranch, tied up. I shot the rope." Jesse's thoughts were fragmented, clouded by pain and worry. "That's so," Sawyer stood adjusting his gun belt. "Well, that's interesting, considering you're being charged with conspiring with her to murder Reverend Collins." Jesse stared at him in disbelief. "What? Bishop Harrington says you paid her to poison the Reverend when he started asking questions about your wife's death." Sawyer's tone was neutral, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. "Says you killed Eleanor too when she threatened to expose your scheme to steal water rights from honest settlers." And the absurdity of it would have made Jesse laugh if he weren't in so much pain. "That's insane. Eleanor was my wife. I loved her. And I never met Nadia Youngblood before last night." "Maybe so." Sawyer checked his pocket watch. But you'll need to make that case to Judge Grant in about 3 hours. Trial set for noon. Trial today. Jesse tried to sit up again, grimacing. I can barely stand. Bishop pushed for it. Says the town needs swift justice. Sawyer's mouth tightened beneath his mustache. Can't say I agree, but Judge Grant listens to Harrington more than he listens to me. Jesse's mind raced despite the pain. This was happening too fast. Someone wanted him convicted and hanged before he had a chance to defend himself, before anyone could ask too many questions about what really happened at the ranch. Why burn my ranch? He asked. Why not just arrest me? Sawyer studied him for a long moment. That's a good question, Blackwood. One I've been asking myself. He glanced toward the jailhouse door, then lowered his voice. Those men weren't acting on any legal authority I issued. Wasn't my posse that rode out there. It was Kane, Jesse said. Matthias Kane works for Cornelius Wade. Something flickered in Sawyer's eyes. Recognition and perhaps concern. The railroad man. What would he want with your ranch? The water. Jesse shifted, trying to find a position that didn't send pain shooting through his body. Eleanor discovered something in it. Something valuable. Sawyer frowned, clearly skeptical. Valuable enough to commit murder. Valuable enough to build an empire. Jesse met the sheriff's gaze steadily. Eleanor was a botanist trained at Cornell. She found compounds in our water that could heal. Things medicine can't touch. She was documenting it all when she died. When Mrs. Harrington poisoned her tea, you mean? Sawyer's tone was neutral, but his eyes had sharpened with interest. So you've heard that theory. Town this size, I hear everything eventually. Sawyer stood. Rest while you can, Blackwood. You'll need your strength for the trial. As the sheriff turned to leave, Jesse called after him. Have you seen her Nadia Youngblood? Sawyer paused at the door. No, but if I were you, I'd hope she's far away from Willow Creek by now. The bishop has folks whipped into a frenzy about the witch. They're calling for her to burn. With that, he was gone, leaving Jesse alone with his pain and fear. Noah was missing. His home was destroyed. And in a few hours, he would face a trial orchestrated by the very people who wanted him dead. He closed his eyes, seeing again the moment when Nadia had locked eyes with him across the burning yard. There had been something in that look, a recognition, an understanding. As if she knew him, knew what was at stake. Find Noah, he silently willed her wherever she was. Keep him safe. It was the only hope he had left. The Willow Creek courthouse was packed to capacity by noon. Townsfolk crammed the wooden benches standing along the walls, even peering through the windows from outside. Jesse, shackled and barely able to stand, was led to the defendant's table by two deputies. The pain in his back was excruciating, but he forced himself to walk upright to meet the hostile stares of the crowd with dignity. Judge Obadiah Grant sat at the bench, his thin face impassive beneath white hair. A former military man turned frontier judge, Grant had a reputation for harsh sentences and swift justice. Beside him, occupying a chair that should have held a court clerk, sat Bishop Francis Harrington. The bishop was a large man with a beard that reached his chest, dressed in black and with a clerical collar that seemed too tight for his fleshy neck. His small eyes gleamed with righteous fervor as they fixed on Jesse. Court is in session, Judge Grant announced, banging his gavel. The territory brings charges of conspiracy and murder against Jesse Blackwood in the death of Reverend Michael Collins. No attorney appeared to defend Jesse. In these parts, legal representation was a luxury few could afford, and fewer still would risk Bishop Harrington's wrath by defending an accused murderer. The prosecution, led by a nervous young man named Peterson, who served as the town's only lawyer, presented their case with stammering efficiency. According to their version of events, Jesse had hired Nadia Youngblood to poison Reverend Collins after the Reverend began investigating Eleanor's death. The motive, Peterson claimed, was to prevent the discovery that Jesse had murdered his own wife when she threatened to leave him. She discovered his scheme to steal water rights, Peterson declared, gaining confidence as the bishop nodded approvingly. Blackwood, being an educated woman of principle, was going to report her husband's illegal damming of creek water to the territorial authorities. He silenced her, then silenced the good Reverend when he got too close to the truth. Witnesses were called, townspeople Jesse barely knew, testifying to his strange behavior after Eleanor's death, to conversations they claimed to have overheard between him and the witch. Mrs. Harrington herself took the stand, dabbing at tears as she described bringing tea to poor Eleanor, only to find her dead the next day, with Jesse showing hardly any grief at all. Throughout it all, Jesse observed the proceedings with growing disbelief. This wasn't a trial, it was theater. The witnesses were rehearsed, the judge barely pretending to be impartial as he consulted with Harrington between testimonies. And through the windows, Jesse could see more of Kane's men positioned around the courthouse, making sure the verdict would be carried out. When his turn came to speak in his defense, Jesse stood despite the pain. "My wife was murdered," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet courtroom. "Not by me, but by those who wanted her research. Eleanor discovered healing properties in the water on our land properties that could revolutionize medicine. She was documenting her findings when she was poisoned." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jesse pressed on. "I never met Nadia Youngblood before the night my ranch was attacked. I never hired her to harm anyone. As for Reverend Collins, I barely knew the man." He turned to face the crowd directly. "Ask yourselves who benefits from these lies. Who wants my land badly enough to fabricate this entire charade?" Bishop Harrington stood, his face flushed with anger. "Blasphemy! This man conspired with a witch, a godless savage, who bewitched Reverend Collins with her potions. Now he tries to cast suspicion on respectable citizens." "Like your business partner, Bishop," Jesse shot back. "Cornelius Wade wants my land for the railroad and for the water rights. You've been meeting with him for months." The bishop's face went from red to purple. "How dare you impugn my character? I have only met with Mr. Wade regarding his generous offer to fund our new church." "After I'm hanged and my land seized, of course," Jesse said coldly. Judge Grant banged his gavel. "Enough, Mr. Blackwood. You will show respect to the court and to the bishop." "This isn't a court," Jesse replied. "It's an execution disguised as justice." The crowd erupted, some shouting for Jesse to hang, others calling for order. Through the chaos, Jesse saw Sheriff Sawyer standing at the back, his hand resting on his holstered gun, his expression troubled. Judge Grant banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order, I will have order." As the noise subsided, the court doors burst open. Every head turned as Sheriff Sawyer stepped forward, his hands still on his gun. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying easily through the now silent room, "I believe we have a witness who might shed some light on these proceedings." And there she was, Nadia Youngblood, standing tall and proud despite the gasps and cries from the crowd. She wore a simple dress of blue calico, her long black hair braided down her back. In her arms, clutching a small teddy bear, was Noah. Jesse's heart stopped, then raced. His son was alive. Safe. "The witch," Bishop Harrington thundered. "Arrest her." "She came in voluntarily," Sawyer replied evenly, "to testify." "I object," Peterson squeaked. This woman is a fugitive, a suspect." Judge Grant seemed uncertain, looking to Harrington for guidance. The bishop's face had gone strangely pale at the sight of Nadia and Noah. "I have evidence," Nadia said, her voice cultured and precise, nothing like the savage the townspeople expected. "Evidence of Eleanor Blackwood's research and of the conspiracy to seize the Blackwood Ranch." She stepped forward, Noah still in her arms. The boy's eyes were fixed on Jesse, wide and frightened. "Let the witness approach," Judge Grant said, finally overriding the bishop's sputtered objections. Nadia walked confidently to the front of the courtroom. Up close, Jesse could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, the determination in the set of her jaw. She was younger than he'd thought, perhaps 30, with a natural dignity that commanded attention. "My name is Nadia Youngblood," she began. "I hold degrees in botany and chemistry from Boston University. I came to this territory to study indigenous medicine, combining it with modern scientific methods." This revelation caused a fresh wave of murmurs. A female scientist was unusual enough. An Indian woman with formal education was beyond most of their comprehension. "I never met Jesse Blackwood before the night his ranch was attacked," she continued. "I was abducted from my cell by men working for Matthias Kane, who works for Cornelius Wade. They brought me to the ranch as it burned, intending to make it appear that Mr. Blackwood and I died together, supporting their narrative of conspiracy." She placed a leather-bound journal on the judge's bench. "This is Eleanor Blackwood's research diary. I found it in the root cellar where Noah was hiding. It details her discoveries about the mineral compounds in the water on their land compounds, with remarkable healing properties. It also records her suspicions that she was being poisoned And by whom? Bishop Harrington surged to his feet. Lies, all lies from a practitioner of dark arts. She bewitched the boy. Look how he clings to her. Noah, who had been silent until now, suddenly squirmed in Nadia's arms. He pointed a small finger directly at Harrington and spoke for the first time in 2 months. You hurt my mama. The courtroom fell silent in shock. Noah's voice, though childish, rang with absolute conviction. You put bad medicine in mama's tea. I saw you. Harrington's face went ashen. The child is confused, traumatized. He has been mute since his mother's death, Nadia explained to the stunned court. Until now. Jesse stared at his son in wonder and heartbreak. Noah had witnessed his mother's poisoning and carried that knowledge in silence all these months. This is absurd, Peterson stammered. The testimony of a disturbed child and, a scientist, Nadia suggested coolly. Or were you going to say savage? Sheriff Sawyer stepped forward. Your Honor, I move that these proceedings be suspended pending a full investigation of the boy's claims and the evidence in Mrs. Blackwood's journal. Judge Grant hesitated, clearly torn between his allegiance to Harrington and the unexpected turn of events. The bishop leaned over, whispering urgently in his ear. Motion denied, Grant announced. This trial will proceed. The witness's evidence is circumstantial at best, and the child's outburst proves nothing. Jesse watched in dismay as the facade of justice reasserted itself. They would hang him regardless of evidence, and likely Nadia too. Noah would become an orphan, his inheritance stolen. Then Nadia did something unexpected. She handed Noah to Sheriff Sawyer and stepped forward, her head high. In that case, she said clearly, I invoke the Marriage Clemency Act of 1850. A hush fell over the courtroom. The Marriage Clemency Act was an obscure territorial law rarely invoked, but still on the books. It allowed a condemned woman to be spared execution if a man of good standing agreed to marry her, taking responsibility for her reform and behavior. That law applies to female criminals, Judge Grant said dismissively, and Mr. Blackwood is hardly in a position to offer marriage to anyone. On the contrary, Nadia replied, I am offering to marry him. Jesse couldn't hide his shock. What was she doing? The law doesn't specify who must make the offer. Nadia continued, only that both parties must consent. And as Mr. Blackwood is widowed and I am unmarried, there is no legal impediment. She turned to Jesse, her dark eyes meeting his. There was determination there and something else, a plea for trust. Noah needs a mother, she said simply, and you need a wife who understands your late wife's work. I offer myself in both capacities. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Bishop Harrington's face contorted with fury as he shouted objections. Judge Grant banged his gavel ineffectually, and through it all, Jesse and Nadia looked at each other, two strangers bound by circumstance and a child's need. Do you accept? She asked, her voice somehow reaching him through the cacophony. Did he have a choice? If he refused, they would both hang, and Noah would be lost. If he accepted this bizarre proposal from a woman he didn't know, yes, he said the word feeling strange on his lips. I accept. Judge Grant, after hurried consultation with a law book and several whispered arguments with Harrington, finally conceded that the Marriage Clemency Act could indeed be applied in this unusual manner. However, he added severely, this court will expect regular proof that this is a genuine marriage, not a legal fiction to escape justice. Sheriff Sawyer will conduct monthly visits to verify your living arrangements. The ceremony, if it could be called that, was performed on the spot. No rings were exchanged, no promises of love or fidelity. Just the bare legal minimum to transform Jesse Blackwood and Nadia Youngblood into husband and wife in the eyes of the law. As they were led from the courthouse, Noah now clutching Jesse's hand while Nadia walked beside them, Bishop Harrington blocked their path. His small eyes burned with hatred as he leaned in close. This changes nothing, he hissed. You won't leave Willow Creek alive. None of you will. Jesse met his gaze steadily. We'll see about that, Bishop. They stepped out into the harsh Wyoming sunlight, a family forged in fire and desperation. Behind them, Harrington conferred urgently with several men, including the stone-faced Matthias Kane. Ahead lay the burned ruins of the ranch and whatever future they could salvage from the ashes. Jesse looked at the woman who was now his wife, the stranger who had saved his son, and quite possibly his own life. What had he gotten himself into? And more importantly, what had she? I hope you know what you're doing, he murmured, as they walked towards Sheriff Sawyer's waiting wagon. Nadia's smile was small but determined. Surviving Mr. Blackwood, just like you. Sheriff Sawyer's wagon creaked along the rutted road toward the Blackwood Ranch, the afternoon sun beating down on its occupants. Jesse sat him back with Noah curled against his side, the boy's small fingers clutching his father's shirt, as if afraid he might disappear. Across from them, Nadia Youngblood, now legally Nadia Blackwood, studied the passing landscape with watchful eyes. No one had spoken since leaving town. The shock of the trial, the impromptu wedding, and Harrington's threats had left them all lost in their own thoughts. Even Noah, who had broken his months-long silence in that dramatic moment, had retreated back into wordless communication, though he occasionally looked up at Nadia with solemn curiosity. As they crested the final hill, the charred remains of the Blackwood Ranch came into view. The main house was a blackened skeleton, timbers jutting like broken bones against the sky. The barn had partially collapsed, though one wall still stood defiantly. Scattered across the yard were the remnants of Jesse's life, a scorched rocking chair, melted glass from windows, the twisted metal frame of Eleanor's bed. "My God," Sawyer murmured from the driver's seat. Jesse felt Nadia's gaze on him, assessing his reaction. He kept his face impassive, though inside the sight tore at him. 8 years of work, the home where Noah had been born, Eleanor's garden, all gone. "The root cellar should still be intact," he said finally. "We can shelter there until I rebuild." Sawyer pulled the wagon to a stop, a safe distance from the ruins. "You sure you want to stay out here?" Blackwood Harrington wasn't making idle threats. "Might be safer in town." "Where the bishop has eyes and ears everywhere." Jesse shook his head. "We'll take our chances here." As they climbed down from the wagon, Noah clung to Jesse's hand, his eyes wide as he took in the destruction of his home. Then, to everyone's surprise, he let go and walked purposefully toward a patch of ground near what had been Eleanor's garden. He knelt and began digging with his small hands. "Noah," Jesse started after him, but Nadia placed a hand on his arm. "Let him," she said softly. "He knows what he's doing." Sure enough, after a moment of digging, Noah uncovered a small metal box. He opened it carefully and pulled out a handful of seed packets miraculously preserved. Eleanor's seed collection buried for safekeeping. "Smart boy," Jesse murmured, his throat tight with emotion. Noah had remembered where his mother kept her most prized seeds. While Sawyer unloaded supplies, he'd brought blankets, cooking utensils. Basic foodstuffs. Jesse and Nadia surveyed the property. The irrigation system Eleanor had begun designing was mostly underground and appeared undamaged. The creek that ran along the northern edge of the property still flowed clear and strong, carrying the mysterious minerals that had been Eleanor's obsession. "Your wife was brilliant," Nadia said as they stood by the creek, "to recognize the potential in this water when most would see only a convenient resource for crops." Jesse glanced at her, surprised by the genuine admiration in her voice. "You've read her research." "Some of it." Nadia knelt and dipped her fingers in the water. "What survived in the root cellar? Her theories about the mineral composition align with Shoshone knowledge of healing waters. My people have known about such places for generations, but we lack the scientific instruments to isolate the compounds." Jesse watched as she examined the water on her fingertips, her expression both clinical and reverent. This was not the savage witch the townspeople feared, but a woman of education and intelligence. "How did you know where Noah was hiding?" he asked. "That night at the ranch," Nadia stood wiping her hand on her skirt. "I didn't nod at first. I was trying to escape when I heard him whimpering. The sound led me to the root cellar." Her eyes met his directly. "I almost left him there thinking he might be safer. But then I saw the journals, realized what they contained, and knew Kane's men would tear the place apart looking for them." Jesse nodded, grateful for her honesty. "And you brought him to the courthouse because a child who has witnessed his mother's murder should have the chance to identify her killer." Her voice hardened slightly. "And because I calculated that his presence would create enough disruption for me to present my evidence, using a traumatized child as a courtroom tactic." Jesse observed, not sure whether to be angry or impressed. "Using every advantage available when fighting murderers who control the law," she countered. "I didn't force Noah to speak. That was his choice when he saw Harrington." They walked back toward the wagon in silence. Sawyer was helping Noah sort through the seed packets, the sheriff's weathered face softening as he spoke gently to the boy. "So," Jesse said, finally keeping his voice low, "this marriage, Let's be clear about what it is. Nadia's expression remained neutral. A legal fiction that saved both our lives. Exactly. He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. I'm grateful for what you did for Noah and for your testimony. But I don't expect, that is, we don't need to share a bed. She raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement flickering across her face. I assumed as much, Mr. Blackwood. This is a temporary arrangement until we can prove Wade and Harrington's conspiracy and clear our names. Jesse felt his face warm slightly. Good, just so we're clear. Perfectly. She started walking again, then added over her shoulder, though you should probably call me Nadia rather than Mrs. Blackwood if we're to convince the sheriff of our domestic harmony. He had to admit she had a point. As dusk approached, they established a makeshift camp near the root cellar. Sawyer helped Jesse salvage usable lumber from the barn to construct a crude shelter, just a roof and 3 walls, but better than nothing. Nadia organized their supplies and prepared a simple meal over a small fire. Noah stayed close to her, watching with solemn attention as she worked. I'll be back to check on you in a few days, Sawyer said as he prepared to leave. Sooner if there's trouble. He lowered his voice, drawing Jesse aside. Wade's been buying up land all around you, Blackwood. Foreclosures mostly. Farmers who suddenly couldn't pay their loans. How convenient for him, Jesse muttered. This isn't his first railroad or his first company town. He has a pattern: acquire land, build infrastructure, then control everything from housing to jobs to medicine. Sawyer's weathered face was grim. But he's never shown this kind of personal interest before sending Kane to do his dirty work directly. It's the water, Jesse said. Eleanor's research proves it has healing properties beyond anything in modern medicine. Wade wants to control it completely. Sawyer nodded slowly, and he's got Harrington in his pocket. The bishop's been preaching about progress and bringing civilization to the frontier every Sunday for months. Now I understand why. He hesitated, then added, this isn't the first time Wade and Harrington have worked together. There are rumors from Colorado from before Harrington came here. Similar pattern: mysterious deaths, land seizures. You're only telling me this now. Jesse felt a surge of anger. I'm telling you because I believe you, Sawyer replied evenly. After seeing what happened at the trial, how Harrington reacted to Noah's accusation, something's not right, and I aim to find out what. With that, he climbed onto his wagon and departed, leaving Jesse with more questions than answers, and with the woman who was now legally his wife. As night fell, they settled into their makeshift shelter. Noah had already fallen asleep on a pallet of blankets, exhausted by the day's events. Jesse and Nadia sat by the dying fire, the silence between them growing more awkward by the minute. You should know, Nadia said finally, that I have no intention of replacing Eleanor in Noah's life. Children need truth, not convenient fictions. Jesse studied her in the firelight. Her profile was strong and proud, her long braid hanging over one shoulder. Is that what you told him, that this marriage isn't real? I told him that I'm here to help protect him and to continue his mother's work. She turned to face him. And that sometimes adults make special arrangements in difficult circumstances. He seems to trust you. Children often recognize genuine intentions more clearly than adults. She poked at the fire with a stick. Perhaps because they haven't yet learned to assume the worst. Jesse couldn't argue with that. How did you end up in Willow Creek? A woman with your education could have opportunities in the East. Nadia's mouth curved in a humorless smile. What opportunities exactly? Teaching at a ladies' college, working as a laboratory assistant to men with half my qualifications. She shook her head. I came west to study indigenous medicine, to document knowledge that's being systematically erased, to combine scientific methods with traditions that predate European arrival. And you ended up accused of witchcraft and nearly hanged. Not the first time I've faced such accusations, she said dryly, though usually they're less formal. Jesse was beginning to understand why Eleanor might have sought this woman out had they met. They shared a passion for knowledge that transcended conventional boundaries, a willingness to look beyond accepted wisdom. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, for what my people have done to yours. Nadia's expression hardened slightly. Your apology, while appreciated, doesn't change history, said Mr. Blackwood, and I'm not interested in being your absolution. That's not what I know, she softened slightly, just as you're not looking for a replacement for Eleanor. We're both pragmatists in an impossible situation. Let's leave it at that. She stood brushing off her skirt. I'll sleep near Noah. He may have nightmares after today. Jesse nodded, watching as she settled on the blankets beside his son. Noah instinctively curled toward her in his sleep, seeking comfort. The sight stirred complicated emotions in Jesse: gratitude, yes, but also a pang of something like jealousy. For months, Noah had been emotionally unreachable, locked in his silent world of grief. Now this stranger had somehow begun to breach those walls. As he stretched out on his own blankets, wincing at the pain from his healing wounds, Jesse wondered what Eleanor would make of all this. His scientific, rational wife, who had nonetheless believed deeply in the interconnectedness of all living things. Would she approve of this unlikely alliance of Nadia sleeping beside their son? He fell asleep with no answers. Only the certainty that tomorrow would bring new challenges in this precarious new life. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of exhausting labor. Jesse focused on rebuilding, starting with a simple one-room cabin to replace the destroyed house. Nadia established a small laboratory in the root cellar, picking up Eleanor's research where it had been interrupted. Noah remained mostly silent, speaking only occasionally and in short sentences, but his eyes were more alert, his movements more purposeful, as he helped with small tasks. They settled into an uneasy routine, their forced intimacy gradually giving way to a working partnership. Jesse found himself grudgingly impressed by Nadia's resilience and practical knowledge. She could identify edible plants, track game, and calculate structural dimensions with equal facility. For her part, Nadia seemed to develop a respect for Jesse's determination and craftsmanship, though she remained reserved, maintaining a careful emotional distance. Sheriff Sawyer visited twice, ostensibly to check that their marriage was genuine, but really to update them on developments in town. Wade had established an office near the saloon and was actively surveying for the railroad line. Bishop Harrington preached increasingly fiery sermons about progress and manifest destiny. Together, they had convinced many townsfolk that the future prosperity of Willow Creek depended on Wade's investments. By the 4th week, the new cabin was habitable, if sparse. They needed supplies: nails, tools, seed for planting, and materials for Nadia's experiments. Despite the risk, a trip to town was necessary. I should go alone, Jesse said, as they discussed the journey over breakfast. You and Noah would be safer here. And you'd be safer with us, Nadia countered. Harrington is less likely to attempt something with witnesses present, especially a child. She's right, Pa, Noah said, suddenly surprising them both. Bad men might hurt you. Jesse and Nadia exchanged glances. It was the longest sentence Noah had spoken since the courtroom outburst. All right, Jesse conceded, unable to argue with his son's logic. But we stay together and we leave at the first sign of trouble. They set out early the next morning. The three of them crowded onto the seat of the small wagon Jesse had managed to salvage and repair. Noah sat between them, clutching his teddy bear, his eyes wide with apprehension as the spires of Willow Creek's church came into view. The town was busier than usual. New construction had sprung up along Main Street, a telegraph office, a land claims bureau, and at the far end, the skeletal beginnings of a train station. Men in suits mingled with the usual frontier crowd, creating an odd juxtaposition of Eastern refinement and Western ruggedness. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. Conversations halted as they passed, heads turning to watch the murderer and the witch who had escaped justice through their unholy union. Some gazes were merely curious, others openly hostile. Jesse kept his expression neutral, though his hand stayed close to the revolver at his hip. They stopped first at Garrison's general store, where the reception was cooler than the spring morning. Mrs. Garrison, who had once slipped Noah peppermint sticks, while Jesse settled his accounts, now watched them with tight-lipped disapproval. Her husband, however, was a businessman first and foremost, and did not refuse their money. While Jesse arranged for lumber to be delivered, Nadia examined the selection of glass containers and chemical supplies. Noah, still clutching at his bear, wandered toward a display of newspapers and announcements posted near the door. Pa, he called suddenly. Look. Jesse joined his son, scanning the notice that had caught his attention. It was an advertisement for Wade Pharmaceuticals seeking research assistance with knowledge of botanical medicine for a new laboratory being established adjacent to the railroad station. Botanical medicine, Jesse read aloud. They're not even trying to hide it. Hide what? Mr. Garrison asked, coming to stand behind them. Wade's real reason for being in Willow Creek, Jesse replied, turning to face the storekeeper. It's not just the railroad he's after. Garrison shrugged. Railroad brings progress, Blackwood. Progress brings opportunity. Town's growing already, in case you hadn't noticed. And who owns the new buildings, Jesse asked. Who holds the mortgages? Who decides which businesses can operate and which can't? That's just business, Garrison said, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. Way of the world. It's monopoly, Nadia interjected, joining them. Control of transportation, housing, commerce, and now medicine. Complete vertical integration. Garrison blinked at her educated vocabulary, clearly not having expected such terminology from an Indian woman. Well, that is, have you heard about the special properties of the water on our land, Mr. Garrison? She continued, her voice conversational, but her eyes sharp. The minerals that can heal conditions modern medicine can't touch. Just rumors, he muttered, glancing around nervously. Town gossip. Not rumors, Jesse said. My first wife, documented it all. That's what Wade wants, exclusive control of a medical breakthrough. Garrison looked increasingly uncomfortable. Look, Blackwood, what you do on your land is your business. But Wade's bringing jobs, a future for Willow Creek. Folks are excited about that. Folks should be asking what it will cost them, Jesse replied, but he could see the conversation was futile. The promise of prosperity had already blinded many to the danger of concentrated power. They gathered their purchases and left the store, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully behind them. As they stepped onto the boardwalk, Jesse noticed a group of men outside the saloon watching them intently. Among them was Matthias Kane, Wade's enforcer, his cold eyes following their every move. Don't look, Jesse murmured to Nadia. Kane's across the street with some of his men. I see them, she replied without turning her head. We should finish our business quickly. They were heading toward the blacksmith's shop when a commotion near the half-built train station caught their attention. A well-dressed man was gesturing animatedly as he supervised the unloading of scientific equipment from a wagon. Gray-haired and distinguished with round spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard, he had the unmistakable air of academic authority. Nadia stopped dead in her tracks, her face draining of color. Dr. Claiborne, she breathed. You know him? Jesse asked, watching her reaction with concern. Professor Thomas Claiborne, she confirmed. He was my mentor at Boston University, one of the foremost botanists in America. Her brow furrowed in confusion. What is he doing here? Before Jesse could suggest caution, Nadia was striding toward the station, Noah trailing behind her. Jesse hurried to catch up, a sense of foreboding growing with each step. As they approached, Dr. Claiborne looked up from his clipboard, his eyes widening in recognition. Miss Youngblood? Good heavens, is that you, Professor? Nadia acknowledged, her voice carefully neutral. I didn't expect to find you in Wyoming territory. Nor I you, my dear. He adjusted his spectacles, taking in her simple frontier dress, then glancing at Jesse and Noah. I see you've adapted to local circumstances. This is my husband, Jesse Blackwood, and his son, Noah. Nadia said the words sounding strange even after weeks of their arrangement. Jesse, this is Dr. Thomas Claiborne, former chair of botanical sciences at Boston University. Jesse extended his hand, which Claiborne shook with academic precision. A pleasure, Mr. Blackwood. Your wife was one of my most promising students. Brilliant mind, though somewhat unconventional in her approaches. That's one way to put it, Nadia said dryly. And what brings you to Willow Creek, Professor? Surely not the frontier charm. A shadow crossed Claiborne's face. An opportunity arose that I found difficult to refuse. He gestured to the Wade Pharmaceutical sign prominently displayed on the station construction. Mr. Wade is establishing a research facility here. He's particularly interested in indigenous medicinal plants and their potential applications. How convenient, Nadia remarked, her voice sharp with suspicion. And did he mention why he selected this particular location for his research? Claiborne glanced around nervously, then lowered his voice. Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more private. Jesse scanned the street. Kane and his men were still watching from across the way, and several construction workers had paused in their labors, clearly eavesdropping. Our wagon is just down the street, he said. We were about to return to our ranch. Yes, excellent. Claiborne nodded eagerly. I have some equipment to supervise here, but perhaps I could call on you tomorrow. I believe we have much to discuss. We'll expect you, Nadia said, her expression making it clear this was not a social invitation but a demand for answers. As they turned to leave, Claiborne caught Jesse's arm. Mr. Blackwood, he said quietly, I knew your wife. Eleanor Blackwood corresponded with me regarding her research on mineral compounds in groundwater. Brilliant work. Groundbreaking, in fact. Jesse stared at him in shock. You knew Eleanor. Not personally, but through scientific circles. Her paper in the Journal of Botanical Medicine was illuminating. His eyes darted around nervously again. I had no idea she was your wife until I arrived here and heard the local gossip. A tragic loss to science, her passing. A tragic loss in every way, Jesse said stiffly, unsure whether to trust this connection. They parted with tense formality, Claiborne returning to his equipment while Jesse, Nadia, and Noah continued to the blacksmith's. Jesse's mind was racing. If Claiborne had corresponded with Eleanor, he might know details of her research that had been lost in the fire. But his presence in Willow Creek working for Wade raised alarming questions. Do you trust him? Jesse asked Nadia, as they waited for the blacksmith to finish their order of nails and hinges. Thomas Claiborne is a brilliant scientist and a mediocre human being, she replied carefully. He recognizes talent but resents it when it exceeds his own. He supported my education until I began challenging his theories. She adjusted her bonnet, shielding her face from curious onlookers. He's also ambitious and financially overextended from what I remember. The perfect target for someone like Wade. So no, Jesse concluded. No, she agreed. But he knows things we need to know. And he seemed frightened. Their business in town concluded, they loaded their supplies and headed back to the ranch, the weight of new complications heavy on their shoulders. As they drove past the saloon, Matthias Kane raised his hat in mock salute, his cold smile promising future confrontations. They were nearly at the edge of town when a man stepped into the road, forcing Jesse to rein in the horses. It was Sheriff Sawyer, his expression grim. Blackwood, he said by way of greeting, was hoping to catch you before you left. Something wrong, Sheriff? Jesse asked, though the answer was written across Sawyer's face. Wade's called a town meeting for Sunday after church. Sawyer glanced at Nadia, then back to Jesse. He's proposing a new ordinance to the town council, something about water rights and public health concerns. He's trying to legally seize our water, Jesse translated, after failing to burn us out or frame us for murder. That'd be my guess. Sawyer adjusted his hat. Thought you should know. Meeting's public if you want to make your case. We'll be there, Nadia said firmly before Jesse could respond. As they drove away from town, the reality of their situation settled over them like a storm cloud. Wade was moving more aggressively than anticipated, bringing in scientific expertise and legal maneuvering to get what he wanted. We need to be ready, Jesse said as the ranch came into view. If Claiborne really does show up tomorrow, we need to find out exactly what Wade knows about Eleanor's research and what he's planning. Nadia nodded, her face set with determination. And if he doesn't come to us, then we'll know whose side he's really on, Jesse finished. What neither of them noticed as they focused on the challenges ahead was the rider who had broken away from Kane's group and was now following at a discreet distance, tracking their route back to the Blackwood Ranch with methodical precision. True to his word, Dr. Thomas Claiborne arrived at the Blackwood Ranch the following afternoon. He came alone, driving a rented buggy loaded with wooden crates of scientific equipment. Despite his academic demeanor, there was an undercurrent of nervous energy in his movements as Jesse helped him unload. Remarkable, Claiborne murmured, surveying the partially rebuilt ranch. Less than a month since the attack, and you've already established a functional homestead. Frontier resilience at its finest. Necessity, Jesse replied simply. What's in the crates, Professor? Microscopes, test tubes, chemical reagents, a small centrifuge, the essentials for continuing Eleanor's research. Claiborne adjusted his spectacles. I told Wade I needed to survey the creek basin for comparative water samples. He was quite eager to provide equipment. Nadia emerged from the root cellar, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression remained guarded as she greeted her former mentor. How generous of Mr. Wade to fund your expedition. Indeed. Claiborne's smile was strained, though perhaps generous isn't quite the right word. Wade does nothing without expectation of return. Noah appeared from behind Nadia, eyeing the stranger with solemn curiosity. Claiborne's face softened at the sight of the boy. "You must be Noah," he said, kneeling to the child's level. "I knew your mother through her scientific papers. She was a brilliant woman." Noah didn't speak, but he stepped forward, examining Claiborne's pocket watch chain with interest. "He doesn't talk much," Jesse explained. "Not since Eleanor died." "Understandable trauma response," Claiborne said with clinical detachment. "Children often retreat into silence as a defense mechanism." "He speaks when he has something to say," Nadia corrected gently, "which is more wisdom than many adults possess." Claiborne chuckled, though the sound carried no real humor. "Always the defender of the unorthodox, Miss Youngblood. Some things haven't changed." "Some things never do," she replied evenly. "Shall we continue this discussion in the laboratory?" The root cellar had been transformed in the weeks since their return. Nadia had established a rudimentary but functional laboratory with shelves of salvaged glassware specimens of local plants and carefully labeled water samples. Eleanor's surviving journals were arranged chronologically on a small desk alongside Nadia's own meticulous notes. Claiborne surveyed the space with obvious approval. "Impressive improvisation given the circumstances. I see you've maintained Eleanor's classification system for the water samples." "It was logical and thorough," Nadia acknowledged, "though I've expanded the mineral analysis based on Shoshone knowledge of the watershed." Jesse leaned against the wall, watching the two scientists examine Eleanor's work. There was a tension between them that went beyond their current circumstances, old academic rivalries perhaps, or deeper conflicts Nadia had never fully explained. "Tell us about Wade," he said, finally cutting through their technical discussion. "What does he know about Eleanor's research?" Claiborne's expression turned grave. "More than he should, though less than he believes." He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "This is the article Eleanor published in the Journal of Botanical Medicine last year, a preliminary study on mineral compounds in Wyoming groundwater and their potential therapeutic applications." Jesse took the paper, scanning its dense technical language. He'd seen drafts of this work, had listened to Eleanor's excitement as she prepared it for publication, but he'd never seen the final version. "She was careful," Claiborne continued. "She didn't specify the exact location of her water source, nor did she detail the complete molecular structure of the compounds, but it was enough to attract Wade's attention. He's built his fortune on pharmaceuticals patenting natural compounds, then charging exorbitant prices for medicines derived from them. And he tracked the research to Eleanor." Nadia said, her voice tight with anger. "Then to this land." "Precisely." Claiborne nodded. "Wade approached me 6 months ago claiming to be funding a research initiative on indigenous medicines. He knew of my work with native botanical traditions and offered substantial funding. It was only after I arrived in Willow Creek that I realized the true nature of his interest and his connection to your wife's death, Mr. Blackwood." "Yet you continue to work for him," Jesse observed, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp. Claiborne had the grace to look ashamed. "I have complicated reasons, not least of which is gathering evidence of his criminal activities. Wade is careful he keeps his hands clean, while men like Kane and Harrington do the dirty work." Noah, who had been quietly arranging test tubes on a shelf, suddenly spoke. "The bad bishop hurt Mama. I saw." The adults fell silent, staring at the boy. Noah continued his arrangement, seemingly unaware of the impact of his words. "Noah," Jesse said gently, kneeling beside his son, "what did you see when Mama got sick?" Noah frowned in concentration. "Bishop came with the tea lady. They looked at Mama's papers when she wasn't looking. Put something in the teapot." His small fingers trembled slightly. "Mama drank it and got sick. I hid under the bed." Jesse felt a chill run through him. Noah had witnessed the poisoning, had carried that knowledge in silence all these months. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The bishop said he'd hurt you too." Noah's eyes filled with tears. "Said he'd hurt everyone if I told." Jesse pulled his son into his arms, holding him tight, as the boy finally released months of pent-up fear and grief. Over Noah's shoulder he met Nadia's gaze, seeing his own anger and determination reflected there. "We have a witness," he said simply. "A 5-year-old child," Claiborne cautioned, "hardly sufficient in a court controlled by Harrington's influence." "Then we need more than testimony," Nadia said, turning to the water samples. "We need irrefutable scientific proof of the water's properties and of Wade's attempts to seize it illegally." For the next several days, the root cellar became a hive of scientific activity. Claiborne's equipment allowed for more sophisticated analysis than Nadia had been able to conduct alone. Together, they mapped the unique mineral composition of the Blackwood water, comparing it to samples from other local sources. Noah, fascinated by the scientific processes, became their eager assistant. He showed a natural aptitude for careful observation, pointing out patterns in the mineral crystals that even the trained scientists sometimes overlooked. More significantly, he began speaking more frequently, his silence giving way to curious questions and thoughtful observations. It was during the fourth day of their research that they made the breakthrough. Nadia had been examining blood samples, her own Jesse's, and a small one from Noah, under the microscope, observing their reaction to the mineralized water. "This is remarkable," she breathed, adjusting the microscope lens. "The compounds are targeting diseased cells while leaving healthy ones intact. It's as if they can identify cellular abnormalities." Claiborne peered through his own microscope, his skepticism giving way to scientific excitement. "The selectivity is unprecedented. Most medicines are blunt instruments by comparison." "What about Noah's sample?" Jesse asked, watching his son arrange glass slides with meticulous care. Nadia hesitated, glancing at the boy. "I've noticed something unusual in his blood work. Small abnormalities in the neurological markers." "What kind of abnormalities?" Jesse felt a fresh wave of concern. "Consistent with petit mal seizures," Claiborne interjected, his clinical detachment returning. "Mild epilepsy, often triggered by severe emotional trauma." Jesse stared at his son with new understanding. The moments of blank staring he'd attributed to grief or shock, had they been small seizures all along? "Can it be treated?" "Conventional medicine has limited options," Claiborne began, but Nadia interrupted him. "But this isn't conventional medicine." She gestured to the water samples. "The mineral compounds are showing remarkable effectiveness against neurological disorders in our preliminary tests. In theory, they could stabilize the abnormal electrical activity causing Noah's seizures." Noah, who had been listening with the peculiar intensity of children who understand more than adults give them credit for, looked up. "The magic water can fix my brain." "It's not magic, Noah," Nadia said gently. "It's science. Nature provides healing that we're only beginning to understand." "Can we try it?" the boy asked, looking to his father for permission. Jesse hesitated, torn between hope and caution. "Is it safe?" "The water itself is perfectly safe to drink," Claiborne assured him. "Your family has been using it for years without harm. The question is whether the therapeutic properties will have the desired effect on Noah's condition." "People have been coming to these healing springs for generations," Nadia added. "My ancestors knew of their properties long before scientific validation." "Decision made," Jesse nodded. Under careful observation, Noah drank a small cup of the specially prepared water. They watched anxiously for any adverse reaction, but the boy showed no immediate effects beyond wrinkling his nose at the mineral taste. Over the next 2 days, however, a change became apparent. Noah's moments of absence, the blank staring episodes that had worried Jesse for months, gradually decreased in frequency and duration. The boy's energy improved, his concentration sharpened, and most remarkably, his speech continued to develop. "It's working," Jesse marveled, watching Noah methodically recording observations in a small notebook Nadia had given him. "He's more present than I've seen him since before Eleanor died." "The neurological benefits appear substantial," Claiborne agreed, making notes of his own. "And this is just one application. The potential for treating more severe conditions. Parkinson's disease, certain types of palsy, perhaps even elements of mental deterioration in the elderly is enormous." "Which explains Wade's interest," Nadia said grimly. "A natural compound that treats untreatable conditions. The commercial value would be astronomical." "Millions," Claiborne confirmed. "Tens of millions, potentially. Enough to justify murder and land theft in the eyes of a man like Wade." Jesse thought of Eleanor, of her excitement over discoveries that could help people, now twisted into a motive for her murder. "She wanted this research to benefit everyone," he said quietly. "She talked about working with medical schools, making the treatment widely available." "Which would have destroyed Wade's business model," Claiborne noted. "He doesn't profit from cures, but from treatments that must be purchased continuously." Their scientific progress was encouraging, but events in town were moving rapidly as well. Sheriff Sawyer rode out to the ranch with troubling news. Bishop Harrington had begun preaching increasingly inflammatory sermons, focusing on the unholy union of Jesse and Nadia and the pagan rituals they were supposedly conducting on their land. He's claiming you're poisoning the town's water supply with your experiments. Sawyer reported, declining the coffee Nadia offered. Says you've brought a curse on Willow Creek that only Wade's modern developments can counteract. Convenient narrative, Nadia observed bitterly. Demonized the indigenous healer and the widower who married her while positioning Wade as the savior of civilization. It's working on some folks, Sawyer admitted, especially after that business with the Petersons well going dry last week. People are scared, looking for someone to blame. Their well is upstream from our property, Jesse pointed out. We couldn't affect it if we tried. Facts don't matter much when fear takes hold, Sawyer said, his weathered face grim. Just thought you should know what you're facing. As the sheriff prepared to leave, he paused, seeming to wrestle with a decision. Finally, he turned back to Jesse and Nadia, his expression grave. There's something else you should know, he said quietly. Something I should have told you sooner. The weight in his voice made Jesse tense. What is it? Sawyer removed his hat, revealing gray hair thinning at the temples. For a moment, he looked older, wearier than his years. I knew your people, Mrs. Blackwood. The Northern Shoshone. Knew them well. Nadia's eyebrows rose slightly. Few white men can make that claim truthfully, Sheriff. I was married to one of them. The words came out flat, matter-of-fact, yet carrying a world of buried emotion. Sarah Redwing, your sister. Nadia stared at him in shock. I had no sister named Sarah. She was taken during a raid when you were just a baby, Sawyer explained, raised by missionaries who renamed her. We met when I was a young deputy in Colorado Territory. This is impossible, Nadia whispered, her usual composure cracking. My mother never spoke of another daughter. Some griefs are too deep for words, Sawyer said simply. Sarah found your family years later, learned of your existence. She wanted to find you to reunite what was left of your family. What happened to her? Jesse asked, seeing that Nadia was too stunned to form the question. Sawyer's face hardened. She discovered something about Harrington, something from his time at the Colorado Mission, evidence of abuse against indigenous children in his care. Before she could report it, she was found dead. Suicide, they called it. I knew better. Harrington killed her, Nadia said, finding her voice at last. And you've known all this time who he is, what he's done. I've spent 15 years gathering evidence, waiting for a chance to bring him to justice. Sawyer replied, his voice tight with suppressed rage. But he's protected by the church, by wealthy men like Wade, who find his particular brand of religious authority useful for controlling communities. Claiborne, who had been listening silently, stepped forward. I can confirm the sheriff's account, he said quietly. I was teaching at Colorado College when the incidents occurred. There were rumors about Harrington's mission, stories of mistreatment and worse. The church transferred him here rather than investigate. And Wade? Jesse asked. What's his connection to all this? Wade was a major donor to the mission, Claiborne explained. When questions arose about Harrington's conduct, Wade facilitated his quiet transfer and subsequent rise in the church hierarchy. In exchange, Harrington has served as Wade's moral authority in communities targeted for development. They've done this before, Jesse realized. Buy land control water, build railroads in company towns, with Harrington providing religious justification for displacing anyone who stands in their way. At least 3 communities that I know of, Sawyer confirmed, always the same pattern. Nadia had gone very still, absorbing this revelation about her unknown sister, about the deeper connections between their enemies. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady again, though her eyes blazed with a new intensity. Then we will be the ones who break the pattern, she said, for my sister, for Eleanor, for all those they've harmed. After Sawyer departed, promising to continue his own investigation into Harrington's past, the atmosphere in the root cellar laboratory was charged with renewed purpose. The scientific work is no longer merely about validating Eleanor's research or protecting the Blackwood land. It had become a mission of justice, of stopping a pattern of exploitation that had destroyed countless lives. We need to make this public, Jesse said, pacing the small space. Not just the Waters properties, but Wade and Harrington's criminal conspiracy. Public opinion can be a powerful weapon, Claiborne agreed, But we need irrefutable evidence presented in a manner that even Wade can't dismiss or suppress. The irrigation system, Nadia said suddenly, looking up from her notes. Eleanor's design for distributing the mineralized water throughout the property, we could complete it, demonstrate its effectiveness publicly. A showcase, Claiborne mused, warming to the idea. Invite journalists, competing pharmaceutical companies, medical researchers, create too many witnesses for Wade to silence. We'd need time, Jesse cautioned. The system is only half built, and Wade is moving quickly with his town ordinances. Then we move faster, Nadia said firmly. We work day and night if necessary. We finish what Eleanor started. And so they did. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of exhausting labor. Jesse focused on completing the irrigation system using Eleanor's detailed plans to channel the creek water through a series of filtration pools that concentrated the mineral compounds. Nadia and Claiborne continued their laboratory work documenting the water's effects on various medical conditions and preparing scientific papers for publication. Noah thrived during this period of intense activity. His seizures disappeared completely, and he became an enthusiastic participant in both the scientific and construction work. He developed a particular bond with Claiborne, who treated the boy's questions with the same seriousness he would afford a graduate student. One morning, as they shared a simple meal in the cabin, Noah looked up from his plate and said clearly, "I want Nadia to be my real mother." The statement, delivered with childish directness, brought conversation to a halt. Jesse and Nadia exchanged startled glances. "Noah," Jesse began carefully, "Nadia and our arrangement is complicated." "But you like each other," the boy insisted. "I see you looking when you think no one watches." Claiborne coughed discreetly and became very interested in his stew. "Noah, I'm honored that you would want me as your mother," Nadia said gently, "but such decisions are not made lightly." "My real mama would want you to stay," Noah continued with the relentless logic of children. "She'd want someone smart like her to help Pa and take care of me." Jesse felt heat rise in his face. The boy wasn't wrong. He had found himself watching Nadia with increasing frequency, admiring her intelligence, her resilience, her gentle patience with Noah. Their marriage of convenience had remained just that, but he couldn't deny that his feelings had grown more complicated over the weeks. "We'll discuss this another time," he said, finally ruffling Noah's hair to soften the deflection. "Right now, we need to focus on finishing the irrigation system." Later that night, after Noah had gone to bed, Jesse found Nadia sitting alone on the porch steps gazing at the stars. He hesitated, then sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm sorry about Noah's comments," he said after a moment. "He doesn't understand the circumstances of our arrangement." "Children understand more than we give them credit for," Nadia replied, her eyes still on the night sky. "They just express it differently. Still, I don't want you to feel obligated. Once this business with Wade is settled, you'll be free to pursue your own path." Nadia turned to look at him, then her expression thoughtful in the moonlight. "And if my path were to remain here, not out of obligation but choice?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Jesse found himself at a loss for words, caught between hope and caution, between loyalty to Eleanor's memory and the undeniable pull he felt toward this remarkable woman. "I don't know what the future holds," he said finally, "but I do know that having you here has made this place feel like home again for both Noah and me." It wasn't quite a declaration, but Nadia seemed to understand what remained unspoken. She reached over and briefly squeezed his hand, the touch sending a current through him that had nothing to do with scientific phenomena. "Then let's secure that future first," she said, rising to her feet. "Starting with our demonstration." The announcement went out by telegraph and postal rider. The Blackwood Ranch would host a demonstration of revolutionary water purification and distribution techniques with significant medical applications. In 2 weeks' time, Claiborne, leveraging his academic reputation, sent personal invitations to scientific colleagues across the country. Nadia, through her Boston connections, contacted medical journals and competing pharmaceutical companies. Jesse, with Sawyer's help, invited territorial officials and neighboring ranchers. Wade's response was swift but indirect. The town council suddenly accelerated the schedule for their water rights ordinance, moving the vote to the day before the Blackwood demonstration. Harassment of their supporters intensified. Sawyer found himself facing trumped-up misconduct charges, and merchants who had agreed to supply materials for the event reported threats to their businesses. Most concerning was the sudden appearance of armed men in patrolling the boundaries of Wade's land holdings, which now surrounded the Blackwood property on three sides. They made no overt moves, but their presence was a clear message Wade was prepared to escalate beyond legal maneuvering if necessary. Despite these pressures, preparations for the demonstration continued. The irrigation system neared completion, a marvel of engineering that combined Eleanor's scientific vision with Jesse's practical craftsmanship. Nadia's laboratory tests yielded increasingly impressive results, documenting the water's efficacy for conditions ranging from rheumatism to certain types of nerve damage. Noah continued to improve his seizures gone completely, his vocabulary expanding daily. He took particular pride in the small greenhouse they constructed, where he helped plant specimens of medicinal herbs that thrived when watered with the mineralized creek water. The night before the town council vote, Jesse, Nadia, and Claiborne gathered in the cabin to finalize their strategy. Noah had been put to bed, though his excitement about the coming demonstration made sleep elusive. Wade will have the votes tomorrow, Sawyer had warned them earlier that day. He's bought off half the council and intimidated the rest. The ordinance will pass. But it won't matter if we've already established prior claim through our demonstration, Claiborne pointed out, spreading their documentation across the table. Once these papers are published, once reporters and scientists have witnessed the irrigation system in operation, Wade can't simply seize the land without creating a national scandal. Assuming our guests arrive safely, Nadia said grimly, Wade controls the stage line and has men watching the roads. I've arranged alternative transportation for our key witnesses, Claiborne assured her. Trust me, they'll be here. Jesse studied the professor, a nagging sense of unease growing in his mind. Claiborne had proven invaluable over the past weeks, his expertise and connections accelerating their work considerably. Yet something about his confidence, his ready solutions to every obstacle, stirred Jesse's instinctive caution. You seem very certain, Professor, he observed, almost as if you've done this before. Claiborne's smile was thin. I've navigated academic politics for 30 years, Mr. Blackwood. Corporate machinations are not so different, just higher stakes. And your history with Wade, Nadia pressed, you've never fully explained how you came to work for him. A shadow crossed Claiborne's face. As I said, he approached me about indigenous medicine research. It seemed a legitimate scientific endeavor. But you knew about his connection to Harrington, Jesse pointed out, about what happened in Colorado. I suspected, Claiborne admitted, but I had no proof until recently. And sometimes, Mr. Blackwood, one must get close to one's enemies to expose them effectively. The explanation was plausible, yet Jesse couldn't shake his unease. There were layers to Thomas Claiborne that remained opaque motivations that didn't align neatly with his professed desire for justice. Dawn brought clear skies and a sense of building tension. Jesse rode into town with Sawyer to attend the council meeting, leaving Nadia and Claiborne to make final preparations for the next day's demonstration. Noah, after intense negotiation, was allowed to stay at the ranch under Nadia's supervision, though Jesse extracted a solemn promise that the boy would remain inside during his absence. Willow Creek's town hall was packed beyond capacity when they arrived. The atmosphere was charged with competing currents of excitement, resentment, and fear. At the front of the room, the council members sat at a long table, their expressions ranging from nervous to smugly confident. Bishop Harrington occupied a prominent seat just behind them, his imposing presence a reminder of the moral authority he wielded over many in the community. Wade himself sat near the front, impeccably dressed in an Eastern suit that marked him as different from the frontier townspeople. This was Jesse's first time seeing the man in person, a tall, lean figure with silver hair and the cold, assessing eyes of a predator. Beside him, Matthias Kane lounged with deceptive casualness, his hand never far from his holstered revolver. The ordinance itself was a masterpiece of legal manipulation, presented as a public health measure to ensure equitable water access for community development. It granted the town council broad powers to regulate water usage throughout the region with specific provisions for testing and potentially redirecting water sources suspected of contamination. Though the Blackwood Ranch was never explicitly named, the ordinance's target was unmistakable. If passed, it would give Wade the legal authority to seize control of the creek that fed their property effectively, rendering Eleanor's irrigation system useless and cutting off their access to the healing minerals. Public comment was permitted before the vote, though the outcome seemed predetermined. Several merchants spoke in favor, their rehearsed endorsements praising Wade's vision for bringing progress and economic opportunity to Willow Creek. A few dissenting voices were quickly shouted down by Wade's supporters, strategically positioned throughout the crowd. When Jesse's turn came to speak, a hush fell over the room. He stood tall, despite the hostile stares, his voice steady as he addressed the council. "This ordinance is not about public health or community development," he began. "It's about one man's attempt to seize control of a natural resource with unique healing properties. Properties my wife Eleanor documented before she was murdered for her discoveries." Oi, gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jesse continued, looking directly at Wade. "Tomorrow we will demonstrate those properties publicly with scientists and journalists from across the country in attendance. We will prove that the water on our land can treat conditions modern medicine considers incurable, and we will expose the criminal conspiracy behind attempts to steal it." Wade's expression remained impassive, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. Bishop Harrington was less controlled, his face flushing with anger as he surged to his feet. "Blasphemy," he thundered. "This man and his heathen wife claim magical powers for simple water. They practice witchcraft and defy God's ordained authority." "We practice science," Jesse countered, "and we defy only those who pervert authority for personal gain, like a bishop who covers up abuse of children in his care." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Harrington's face went from red to ashen, his eyes darting to Wade in panic. The crowd erupted in confusion, some defending the bishop, others demanding explanation. The council chairman banged his gavel repeatedly, struggling to restore order. "This meeting will come to order. We are here to vote on the water ordinance, not to entertain unsubstantiated accusations." Through the chaos, Jesse noticed Wade lean over to whisper something to Kane, who nodded slightly before slipping out a side door. Whatever Wade's contingency plan had been, it was now in motion. The vote, when finally held, surprised no one. The ordinance passed 4-1, with only the elderly widow who owned the general store voting against it. Its provisions would take effect immediately, granting Wade's men authority to inspect and potentially seize control of the Blackwood Creek within 24 hours. "You've just signed away the future of this town," Jesse told the council as the meeting concluded. "For the sake of your children, I hope our demonstration tomorrow opens your eyes to what you're losing." Outside the town hall, Sawyer pulled Jesse aside, his expression grave. Kane left during the meeting with 3 of his men, headed east. Toward the ranch, Jesse realized a cold dread settling in his stomach. "We need to get back. Now." They rode hard, pushing their horses to the limit. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the Blackwood property, Jesse's worst fears were confirmed. Smoke rose from the direction of the cabin, and mounted figures moved across the property in an organized search pattern. "Nadia, Noah," Jesse spurred his horse forward, caution forgotten in his panic. They reached the yard to find the cabin intact, but smoking someone had tried to set it on fire, though the flames had been extinguished before causing major damage. Of more concern was the state of the irrigation system. Several key channels had been deliberately destroyed, water pooling uselessly across the ground. "Nadia," Jesse shouted, leaping from his horse. "Noah." No answer came from the cabin. Heart pounding, Jesse burst through the door, Sawyer close behind him. The interior was in disarray, tables overturned, Eleanor's journals scattered, signs of a violent struggle evident in the broken furniture and blood-stained floor. "The root cellar," Jesse said, already moving toward the hidden entrance. "They might have—" The trap door stood open, the laboratory below ransacked. Scientific equipment lay, shattered water samples spilled across the dirt floor. But no Nadia, no Noah. "They've taken them," Jesse whispered, horror turning his blood to ice. "Not just them," Sawyer said, grimly examining the destruction. "All the research, all your evidence, it's gone." Jesse staggered back against the wall, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the disaster. Not only had Wade's men destroyed their work, but they had taken the 2 people he cared about most in the world. The demonstration, their plans for exposing Wade, all of it lay in ruins. "Claiborne," he said suddenly. "Where is he? Was he taken too?" They searched the entire property, finding no sign of the professor. No body, no indication of his fate. It was as if he had simply vanished during the attack. As the reality of their situation sank in, Jesse noticed a folded paper nailed to the cabin door, a message he had overlooked in his initial panic. With trembling hands, he tore it free and unfolded it. The message was brief and chilling. Blackwood, your wife and son are unharmed for now. Their continued safety depends on your cooperation. The demonstration is canceled. All research materials now belong to Wade Pharmaceuticals through legal acquisition from their rightful owner, Professor Thomas Claiborne, legal heir to Eleanor Blackwood's estate as her only surviving brother. A deed of sale for your property will be delivered tomorrow. Sign it and your family will be returned. Refuse and you will never see them again. You have until noon tomorrow to decide. Ems Kane. Claiborne, Jesse breathed, the betrayal hitting him like a physical blow. Eleanor's brother, that's impossible. She was an only child. A convenient fiction, Sawyer said, reading over his shoulder. With the right documents and Wade's influence easy enough to establish legally. He was working for Wade all along, Jesse realized. Using us to complete Eleanor's research to prove the water's value. And we trusted him, gave him access to everything. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. For weeks, they had welcomed Claiborne into their home, shared their research, even allowed him to grow close to Noah, all while he plotted to steal everything they had built. What now? Sawyer asked quietly. Jesse stared at the message, at the ultimatum it presented. Sign away the land that had been his and Eleanor's dream, or lose Nadia and Noah forever. No choice at all, really. Now, he said, his voice hardening with resolve, we get them back, whatever it takes. Dawn broke over the Blackwood Ranch with a cruel indifference to the devastation below. Jesse stood in the yard surrounded by the wreckage of his hopes, the damaged irrigation system, the ransacked laboratory, the scorched cabin walls. But it was the absence that cut deepest. Nadia and Noah, taken by Wade's men, held hostage to force his surrender. We need a plan, Sawyer said, checking the ammunition in his revolver. The sheriff had remained through the night, helping Jesse salvage what little remained of their research. Wade will expect you at noon with a signed deed. I'm not signing anything, Jesse replied, his voice hard with resolve. But I am going to get my family back. How Wade has dozens of armed men. The law is technically on his side now that the ordinance has passed. And with Claiborne claiming to be Eleanor's brother, Jesse's eyes moved to the creek that ran along the northern edge of his property, the source of the water that had brought both miracle and tragedy to his family. Eleanor had seen its potential, had given her life for it. He wouldn't dishonor her memory by surrendering now. The demonstration, he said slowly. We go ahead with it. Sawyer stared at him. Have you lost your mind? There's nothing left to demonstrate. Then we'll bring the demonstration to town, Jesse countered, right to Wade's doorstep. Before Sawyer could argue further, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. Both men reached for their weapons, but relaxed slightly when they recognized the lead rider, Martha Garrison, the elderly widow who owned the general store and had been the lone dissenting vote on the town council. Mr. Blackwood, she called as she dismounted, we came as soon as we heard. Behind her, a dozen townspeople dismounted, the blacksmith and his sons, several farmers, the telegraph operator, and others who had never openly defied Wade or Harrington. Word spread about the raid on your ranch, Martha explained, about your wife and boy being taken. Not everyone in Willow Creek supports Wade's methods. Wade's staging a public ceremony at noon, added the blacksmith, Samuel Porter, going to announce the legal acquisition of your land with Judge Grant officiating. Claiborne will be there too, presenting himself as Eleanor's brother and rightful heir. Jesse exchanged glances with Sawyer. This changed things. A public ceremony meant Nadia and Noah would likely be present, as well displayed as proof of Wade's mercy in returning them after Jesse signed the deed. As the morning wore on, more supporters arrived, ranchers who had lost land to Wade's manipulations, families who had suffered under Harrington's moral tyranny, even a few shopkeepers brave enough to risk their livelihoods. Together, they worked frantically to salvage enough of the irrigation system to provide a demonstration, albeit a much smaller one than originally planned. Several barrels of the mineralized water were loaded onto wagons, along with whatever research materials had survived the raid. We need to create a diversion, Jesse explained as they gathered, something to draw attention when Wade is at his most vulnerable, standing before the crowd, believing his victory is complete. My boys and I can handle that, Porter offered. We've been working on something special in the forge. By 11, their makeshift caravan was ready. Nearly 30 people, a small army of the disenfranchised and the defiant, prepared to challenge Wade's power in the heart of the town he thought he controlled. Remember, Jesse cautioned, our priority is rescuing Nadia and Noah. Everything else is secondary. The town square was transformed when they arrived. A platform had been erected before the half-completed train station draped with red, white, and blue bunting. Rows of chairs faced it, already filling with spectators. Armed men, Wade's private security, lined the perimeter, their presence both protective and menacing. Jesse's group split up as planned, blending into the crowd while Porter and his sons disappeared toward the rear of the train station. Sawyer positioned himself near the platform, his hand never far from his holstered revolver. At precisely noon, a hush fell over the gathering as Cornelius Wade ascended the platform. In person, he cut an impressive figure, tall and distinguished in his tailored suit, silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. His smile revealed perfect teeth as he surveyed what he clearly viewed as his domain. Behind him came Bishop Harrington, resplendent in clerical robes, and Judge Grant carrying a leather portfolio. And then, to Jesse's rage and relief, Nadia and Noah appeared escorted by Matthias Kane. They were alive and apparently unharmed, though Nadia's wrists were bound before her, and Noah clung to her skirts with wide, frightened eyes. The boy's gaze darted through the crowd, searching desperately for his father. Last to join the group was Thomas Claiborne, dressed in an expensive new suit, his academic stoop now mysteriously absent, as he took his place beside Wade with confident bearing. "Friends, neighbors, distinguished visitors," Wade began, his voice carrying easily across the square. "Today marks a historic moment for Willow Creek as beginning of a new era of prosperity and progress." Jesse edged closer to the platform, keeping to the shadows. He needed to be in position when Porter's diversion began. "Through the visionary leadership of your town council and the generous cooperation of the Claiborne family," Wade continued, "we have secured the final piece of land necessary for our ambitious development plans." Jesse had heard enough. He pushed forward through the crowd, ignoring the gasps that followed his recognition. A path cleared before him as he strode toward the platform, his face set with determination. "That's a lie," he called, his voice cutting through Wade's practiced rhetoric. "Eleanor had no brother. Claiborne is a fraud, and you're a thief and a murderer." Wade's smile never faltered, though his eyes hardened. "Ah, Mr. Blackwood, we've been expecting you. I trust you've brought the signed deed as requested?" "I've brought nothing but the truth," Jesse replied, "and witnesses to hear it." He gestured to the crowd where several journalists from Denver and St. Louis were already scribbling notes. The territorial governor's representative watched with keen interest from the front row. "The truth," Wade said dismissively, "is that your continued presence on land that rightfully belongs to the Claiborne family has been tolerated out of respect for your loss. But that patience has limits." "Tell them about Eleanor's murder," Jesse demanded. "Tell them about the poison in her tea. Tell them why you want the water rights so badly that you'd kill a woman and steal her research." Harrington stepped forward, his face flushed with righteous indignation. "Blasphemy and slander. This man conspired with a heathen witch to poison good Reverend Collins. Now he accuses respected citizens of his own crimes." A tense silence fell over the square. Even those who had supported Wade seemed uncertain now, looking between the wealthy businessmen and the defiant rancher with new questions in their eyes. Before Jesse could respond, Nadia suddenly broke free from Kane's grip and stepped to the edge of the platform. Despite her bound hands, she stood tall, her voice ringing clear. "The water on the Blackwood land contains mineral compounds that can heal conditions modern medicine cannot touch," she declared. "I've documented its effects on neurological disorders, including those affecting Noah Blackwood epileptic seizures caused by witnessing his mother's murder." Gasps and murmurs swept through the crowd. Nadia continued relentlessly. "Eleanor Blackwood discovered these properties and was killed for her research. Wade and Harrington conspired to poison her just as they arranged Reverend Collins's death when he began questioning their methods. Just as they killed Sarah Redwing, my sister in Colorado years ago, when she discovered Harrington's abuse of children in his missionary care." "Silence her," Wade hissed to Kane, his composure finally cracking. But as Kane moved toward Nadia, Sheriff Sawyer pushed forward, badge gleaming in the sunlight. "Every word she speaks is true," he called. "I have evidence of Wade and Harrington's crimes going back 15 years. Land theft, murder, abuse, all covered up by money and false piety." The crowd's mood shifted palpably, dividing between those still loyal to Wade and those now openly questioning his authority. Arguments broke out, pushing and shoving, escalating toward violence. Wade raised his hands, attempting to restore broad order. These are baseless accusations from desperate people. Judge Grant, please proceed with the property transfer as planned. Before he could speak, the world exploded into chaos. A series of deafening blasts erupted from behind the train station, sending columns of colored smoke billowing into the sky. Porter and his sons had timed their diversion perfectly, homemade fireworks creating a spectacular distraction. In the ensuing panic, Jesse leaped onto the platform. Kane drew his gun, but Sawyer was faster, his bullet catching the enforcer in the shoulder and spinning him to the ground. Wade and Harrington retreated, shouting for their men to restore order. Claiborne vaulted from the platform and disappeared into the dispersing crowd. Jesse reached Nadia and Noah, cutting her bonds with his hunting knife. "Are you hurt?" "We're fine," Nadia assured him, though dark bruises circled her wrists. "But we need to get to the ranch. Wade has men destroying what's left of the irrigation system." "It's too late for that," Wade's voice cut through the chaos. He had recovered his composure and now stood at the edge of the platform surrounded by armed guards. "Your pathetic demonstration has failed, Blackwood. My men will take care of any remaining evidence while I deal with you personally." The square had emptied of civilians, leaving only Wade's forces facing Jesse's smaller group of supporters. Porter and his sons had created a defensive position near the general store, while Sawyer and several armed ranchers formed a protective circle around Jesse, Nadia, and Noah. "Get the boy to safety," Jesse murmured to Martha Garrettson. "Take the back alley to your store." Martha nodded, her wrinkled face determined. "Been hiding things from men like Wade my whole life. Come, child," she added to Noah. "No," Noah cried, clinging to Nadia. "I want to stay with you and Pa." "You have to go with Mrs. Garrison," Nadia told him firmly. "Remember what we practiced. When there's danger, you follow the plan." The boy's lips trembled, but he nodded bravely. "Like a scientist," he whispered. "Exactly like a scientist," Nadia agreed, kissing his forehead. As Martha led Noah away, Wade's men began to advance across the square. Jesse and his supporters fell back toward the buildings, using wagons and water troughs for cover. The first shots rang out, splintering wood and shattering windows. "They're heading for the ranch," Sawyer shouted, spotting a group of riders breaking away from the main force. "They'll destroy everything." "Let them try," Jesse replied grimly. "We rigged what was left of the irrigation system before we left. Anyone tampering with it is in for a surprise." The battle for Willow Creek erupted in earnest gunfire, echoing between the buildings as Wade's hired guns exchanged shots with the defenders. Jesse and Nadia made their way toward the wagons containing the barrels of mineralized water, determined to protect their only remaining evidence. "We need to get to higher ground," Nadia said, and as bullets thudded into the wagon beside them. "The church tower would give us a clear view of their movements." They made a dash across the street, ducking and weaving between pockets of fighting. The church stood somewhat removed from the main square, its spire rising above the surrounding buildings. Inside the nave was deserted, weak sunlight, filtering through stained glass to cast colored patterns across the empty pews. Jesse barred the heavy wooden doors behind them, while Nadia gathered candles and matches from the altar. "This way," she said, leading him toward a narrow spiral staircase that ascended into the bell tower. "There's an observation platform just below the bells." From the top, they could see the entire town laid out below them, the ongoing skirmish and the square riders heading toward the Blackwood Ranch townspeople, barricaded in their homes or fleeing toward outlying farms. "There," Nadia pointed toward the train station. "Wade and Claiborne are loading something onto that private car crate's documents." Jesse squinted against the sun. "The research. They're taking it and running." "Not all of it," Nadia said with grim satisfaction. "They only got what was visible. Eleanor's most important work is still hidden where they'll never find it." Before Jesse could question this, the church doors below shuddered under a heavy impact. Someone was trying to break in. "Blackwood," Wade's voice carried up the tower. "I know you're in there. There's nowhere left to run." Another crash and the doors gave way. Heavy footsteps echoed through the nave below. "The barricade didn't hold," Jesse muttered, checking his revolver. 2 bullets left. Nadia laid a hand on his arm. "There's another way," she said quietly. "The tower connects to the rectory through a maintenance passage. Bishop Harrington showed it to me when I first arrived before he decided I was a witch." They found the narrow door hidden behind a decorative panel, slipping through just as boots began to thunder up the spiral staircase. The passage was tight and dark, forcing them to feel their way along rough stone walls. "How did you know about Eleanor's hidden research?" Jesse whispered as they inched forward. "I didn't, not for certain," Nadia admitted, "but I suspected. The journal entries we found were too simplified, too obvious. Eleanor was more methodical, more precise in her documentation. It felt like she was writing for an audience she didn't trust." The passage opened into the rectory's upper floor, a modest apartment where Harrington lived when not traveling between parishes. From the window, they could see that the fighting had intensified. Porter's Forge was ablaze, and several buildings along Main Street showed damage from stray bullets. Sawyer and the remaining defenders had been pushed back to the general store. "We need to get back to the ranch," Jesse decided. "If there's hidden research as you suspect, we need to find it before Wade's men destroy everything." They slipped out the rectory's back door and made their way to the livery stable, where they found two horses still in their stalls. The stable boy, a teenager named Eddie, who had always been kind to Noah, helped them saddle up. "Mr. Blackwood," he said urgently, "folks are saying all kinds of things. About Mrs. Blackwood being murdered, about the water on your land being special. Is it true, Ishtia?" "It's true," Jesse confirmed. "Wade and Harrington killed her for her discoveries, and now they're trying to steal everything she worked for." Eddie's young face hardened with decision. "Then take these," he said, producing a rifle and ammunition from beneath a pile of hay. "My pa's buffalo gun. Said never to use it unless it was life or death." They rode hard, taking the back trails to avoid Wade's patrols. As they approached the Blackwood property, the evidence of renewed destruction was clear. Fresh smoke rising from the direction of the cabin churned earth where the irrigation channels had been further damaged. But something else caught their attention as well, a strange ethereal blue glow emanating from the creek bed, visible even in the afternoon light. "The minerals," Nadia breathed. "They're reacting to whatever Wade's men did to the system." They dismounted at the edge of the property, approaching cautiously through the cover of trees. What they saw as they crested the final rise stopped them in their tracks. The entire creek bed was glowing an unearthly blue-green light pulsing beneath the water's surface. Where the irrigation channels had been broken, the mineralized water had pooled and concentrated, creating patches of even more intense luminescence. Several of Wade's men lay unconscious near these pools, apparently overcome by gases released in the disturbance. "The reaction accelerates when the mineral concentration increases," Nadia explained. "Your rigging must have broken the filtering system, allowing the raw minerals to accumulate." As they watched, more of Wade's men emerge from the damaged cabin, carrying armfuls of documents and equipment. Claiborne was with them, directing the systematic destruction of anything they couldn't carry. "The root cellar," Jesse whispered. "They haven't found it yet." "Because it's not where they think it is," Nadia replied. "The entrance they know about is a decoy. Eleanor created a second laboratory hidden beneath the original." Jesse stared at her in disbelief. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because she told me in her journal. Not directly, but in a code we developed at University Chemical Formulas, with subtle errors that spelled out messages when properly analyzed. She suspected someone was reading her work, so she created a false trail while protecting her most important discoveries." The full implications hit Jesse like a physical blow. All this time, Eleanor had been preparing for the very scenario that had unfolded, protecting her research from those who would exploit it, creating a legacy that could survive even her death. "We need to get to that hidden lab," he said, checking the rifle Eddie had provided, "before Wade realizes what he's missing." In the growing darkness, they circled behind the cabin, using the increasingly heavy rainfall to mask their approach. Wade's men, frustrated by the weather and the strange phenomena in the creek bed, were growing careless in their search, missing the subtle signs that would have led them to Eleanor's true laboratory. There, Nadia pointed to a seemingly ordinary stone outcropping near the damaged irrigation control point. "The entrance is beneath that rock formation. Eleanor designed it to look like a natural feature." "How do we open it?" Jesse asked, scanning constantly for threats. "Water pressure," Nadia replied. "The control mechanism is tied to the creek's flow. When triggered correctly, it creates a hydraulic lift system." She knelt beside the rocks, her fingers finding hidden catches and levers that Jesse would never have noticed. With practiced precision, she manipulated the mechanism until a soft click sounded beneath the stone. Slowly, a section of the outcropping shifted, revealing a narrow passage sloping downward into darkness. Jesse looked at Nadia with newfound admiration. His wife, his first wife, had been even more brilliant than he had realized, and had found in Nadia a worthy successor to her work. "After you, Mrs. Blackwood," he said with unexpected formality. Together they descended into the hidden laboratory, leaving behind the storm and the men who would destroy everything they had fought for. As the secret door closed silently behind them, Jesse couldn't help but feel they were entering not just a physical space, but a new chapter in their struggle, one where Eleanor's foresight might finally give them the advantage they desperately needed. The hidden laboratory beneath the Blackwood Ranch was everything Eleanor's brilliant mind had promised, a fully equipped scientific sanctuary untouched by Wade's destruction. Jesse marveled at his late wife's foresight as Nadia methodically gathered research journals, samples, and legal documents into waterproof oilskin pouches. "We need to trigger the full reaction," Nadia said, studying a detailed schematic of the irrigation system. "Eleanor's notes describe a master control valve that will release concentrated minerals directly into the main creek. The resulting phenomenon should be visible for miles." Jesse examined the wound in his side where Claiborne's bullet had grazed him. "Painful but not life-threatening. Can we trigger it from here?" "Yes." Nadia indicated a series of levers built into the laboratory wall. "These connect to the hydraulic system. Once activated, we'll have approximately 10 minutes before the reaction reaches full intensity." "Then let's not waste time." Jesse moved to the levers, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "Wade and his men are still up there, destroying what's left of our home." Together they pulled the master control lever. A deep rumbling vibrated through the hidden chamber, followed by the sound of rushing water. Pressure gauges, mounted on the wall, began to climb steadily. "It's working," Nadia confirmed. "The concentrated minerals are flowing into the main creek bed." "How long until the reaction becomes visible?" "Minutes, but we should be outside to witness it and to make sure others see it too." They gathered the essential evidence and made their way to the secondary exit Eleanor had wisely incorporated into her design, a narrow tunnel that emerged in a small cave on the hillside overlooking the property. As they reached the mouth of the cave, the first signs of the extraordinary reaction became apparent. The creek water, already glowing with an eerie blue-green luminescence, suddenly pulsed brighter. The intensity increased with each passing moment until the entire creek bed appeared to be filled with liquid fire. Wade's men stopped their destruction of the ranch buildings, staring in confusion and growing alarm at the unearthly phenomenon. "My God," Jesse breathed as the reaction accelerated. Columns of glowing water began to rise from the creek bed, creating a spectacle visible for miles in every direction. The minerals reacting with air produced colors ranging from deep sapphire to brilliant emerald. Night transformed into an otherworldly day as the light intensified, casting everything in an ethereal blue glow. Wade's men fled in panic, abandoning their weapons and horses in their haste to escape what seemed like supernatural forces unleashed. Only Claiborne remained, approaching the phenomenon with scientific fascination, overriding his self-preservation instinct. "The final failsafe," Nadia murmured. "Eleanor's insurance policy against those who would steal her work." As they watched from their hillside vantage point, the first curious onlookers began to arrive, townspeople drawn by the spectacular light show journalists who had been in Willow Creek for Wade's victory ceremony, and then most significantly a carriage bearing the territorial governor's insignia. "Governor Osborne," Jesse identified the distinguished figure who emerged from the carriage. He must have been passing through the territory. The governor, a tall man with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command, stared at the phenomenon with undisguised astonishment. Behind him, several federal marshals fanned out, hands on their weapons, as they assessed potential threats. "Now's our chance," Jesse said, clutching the oilskin pouches containing Eleanor's evidence. "Let's end this once and for all." They descended the hillside, approaching the growing crowd cautiously. Wade was there, attempting to maintain control of the situation, with Harrington and Claiborne flanking him. Their faces, illuminated by the pulsing blue light, showed varying degrees of desperation and calculation. "A dangerous chemical accident," Wade was explaining to the governor, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "The result of Blackwood's reckless experiments. My men were attempting to contain the damage when—" "That's a lie," Jesse called out, stepping into the open with Nadia beside him. "Governor Osborne, my name is Jesse Blackwood. This is my land, and what you're witnessing is the proof of my late wife Eleanor's scientific breakthrough, a breakthrough that Cornelius Wade murdered her to obtain." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The governor turned his shrewd eyes assessing Jesse and Nadia. Serious accusations, Mr. Blackwood. I presume you have evidence to support them? We do. Nadia stepped forward, her bearing dignified despite her torn and muddy clothing. I am Dr. Nadia Youngblood Blackwood, botanist and chemist. What you're seeing is a controlled demonstration of the mineral properties in this creek minerals with remarkable healing capabilities that my predecessor, Eleanor Blackwood, documented extensively. She opened one of the oilskin pouches, removing a leather-bound journal. This contains Eleanor's research, including her suspicions that she was being poisoned for her discoveries. It also contains documented evidence of Wade and Bishop Harrington's criminal conspiracy across 3 territories. Preposterous, Wade blustered, though his complexion had paled beneath his silver hair. Governor, these people are desperate criminals attempting to maintain their illegal claim to Claiborne family property. Eleanor had no brother, Jesse countered, producing another document from the waterproof pouch. This is her family Bible with a complete genealogy. She was an only child. Thomas Claiborne is a fraud paid by Wade to create a legal fiction. The governor accepted the Bible, examining the meticulously recorded family history with growing interest. And the water, he asked, gesturing toward the still glowing creek. You claim it has healing properties that could revolutionize medicine, Nadia confirmed. Properties worth killing for if one's interest is profit rather than healing. By now, Sheriff Sawyer had arrived with Martha Garrison and Noah. The boy broke away from them, running to embrace his father and Nadia with tearful relief. Sheriff, the governor acknowledged Sawyer. What's your assessment of these claims? Sawyer stepped forward, his weathered face solemn in the unearthly light. I have my own evidence to add, Governor. 15 years ago, my wife, Sarah Redwing, a Shoshone woman, discovered Bishop Harrington abusing children at his Colorado mission. She was found dead shortly after. Suicide, they called it. He removed a packet of letters from inside his vest. These are sworn statements from witnesses who saw Harrington and Wade together the night she died. I've spent 15 years building this case, waiting for justice. The crowd had grown silent, watching the impromptu trial unfold with collective breath held. Wade's composure was cracking visibly, now his eyes darting between the governor, the evidence being presented, and the armed marshals who had begun to move closer. These are fabrications, he insisted, though his voice had lost its authoritative ring. Governor, I am a respected businessman with interests throughout the territory. These people are attempting to defraud me to steal proprietary research. The research was never yours to begin with, Jesse interrupted. You stole it from Eleanor, just as you've stolen land and lives from countless others to build your empire. One of the journalists present, a sharp-eyed woman from the Denver Chronicle, pushed forward. Governor, my paper has been investigating Wade Enterprises for months. We've documented a pattern of suspicious deaths in land acquisitions across 3 territories, always following the same methods. Reverend Collins was looking into these connections before his sudden death. Wade's control finally shattered. Claiborne, he hissed, tell them the legal rights are yours. But Claiborne, seeing the direction events were taking, had already begun to edge away from his patron. I may have been mistaken about certain aspects of my relationship to Eleanor Blackwood. He admitted his academic precision, giving Wade a nervous equivocation. Wade offered substantial funding for my research if I would assist with the legal transfer of the property. You lying snake, Wade lunged at Claiborne, only to be restrained by 2 marshals. I made you. I gave you everything. Take Mr. Wade into custody, the governor ordered, his expression grim, and the bishop as well. We'll sort this matter out properly. Harrington, who had remained unnervingly silent throughout the confrontation, suddenly bolted toward the church. Stop him, Sawyer shouted. He's going for the records. 2 marshals took off in pursuit, but Harrington had a head start. Before they could reach him, he had barricaded himself inside the church rectory. He keeps ledgers, Sawyer explained urgently. Records of all his dealings with Wade, all the bribes, all the cover-ups. If he destroys those, a flicker of flame appeared in the rectory window. Harrington had set fire to the evidence. What happened next occurred so quickly that witnesses later gave conflicting accounts. Some claimed Matthias Kane, Wade's enforcer, who had been wounded in the earlier fighting, appeared from nowhere with murderous intent. Others insisted he was attempting to stop Harrington from destroying evidence. Whatever his motivation, Cain burst into the burning rectory just as the flames reached a stored cache of lamp oil. The resulting explosion rocked the town square, sending a fireball into the night sky that momentarily rivaled even the unearthly glow from the creek bed. When the smoke cleared, the rectory was a blazing inferno, with no possibility that anyone inside had survived. "Damn fool," Sawyer muttered, though it wasn't clear whether he meant Harrington or Kane. "Always thought he'd face proper justice." "Perhaps this was justice in its way," the governor observed quietly, "though I would have preferred the courts handle the matter." As the chaos subsided, attention returned to Wade, now securely in custody and stripped of his arrogant bearing. The man who had terrorized 3 territories with his wealth and power looked suddenly old and diminished, his empire crumbling around him. "I demand counsel," he insisted, though the imperious tone had given way to desperation. "This is a conspiracy against legitimate business interests. I have friends in Washington." "Save it for the territorial court." The governor cut him off. "Though given the evidence already presented, I suspect your case will eventually be heard by a federal judge." He turned to Jesse and Nadia. "I'll want formal statements from both of you and all your documentation properly filed. But based on what I've seen tonight, Mr. Wade will be facing multiple charges of murder, conspiracy, and fraud." As the marshals led Wade away, Claiborne stepped forward hesitantly. "Governor, I wish to cooperate fully. While I was indeed complicit in Wade's scheme, I had no knowledge of the murders. I believed we were engaged in legitimate business acquisition, albeit with unconventional methods." "Unconventional methods," Nadia repeated with quiet disdain. "Is that what you call falsifying your identity to steal a dead woman's research?" Claiborne had the grace to look ashamed. "I was wrong, Nadia. Eleanor's work was brilliant, far beyond anything I could have produced. Wade offered me recognition funding, a chance to be part of something historic. My ambition clouded my judgment. You'll have plenty of time to reflect on that judgment in territorial prison," the governor said coldly. "Take him as well," he instructed the remaining marshal. As Claiborne was led away, the governor turned back to Jesse and Nadia. "The Blackwood property and all research associated with it are hereby placed under territorial protection, pending formal recognition of your ownership rights. I believe that once the legal proceedings are completed, you will find your claim fully restored, Mr. Blackwood." "Thank you, Governor," Jesse set his arm around Noah's shoulders, "but the ownership should reflect reality." He looked at Nadia. "Half belongs to my wife, my real wife. Without her, none of this would have been possible." Nadia's eyes widened slightly at this public acknowledgement of their marriage as something more than a legal convenience. The governor, noting the exchange, smiled slightly. "Very well. The record will show joint ownership by Jesse and Nadia Blackwood." He glanced at the still glowing creek. "I must say the potential of this discovery is extraordinary. Have you considered how you'll proceed with its development?" "Eleanor wanted it to benefit everyone," Jesse said firmly, "not to be controlled by one company or one man." "We're establishing a research foundation in her name," Nadia added, "to ensure the water's healing properties are studied properly and made available to those who need them most." The governor nodded approvingly. "A fitting memorial. I'll ensure you have the necessary territorial support." As the official proceedings concluded, the crowd began to disperse, though many lingered to watch the extraordinary light show from the creek bed. The reaction was gradually subsiding, the glowing columns receding as the mineral concentration normalized, but the effect remained spectacular, a testament to Eleanor's scientific genius and her determination to protect her discoveries even from beyond the grave. Martha Garrison approached Noah's hand in hers. "Well," the elderly shopkeeper said with satisfaction, "I'd say Willow Creek is due for some changes." "Good ones, I hope," Jesse replied, noting how the townspeople who had once shunned them were now approaching with tentative offers of help and congratulations. "The best kind," Martha assured him, "the kind that come when people stop being afraid and start standing up for what's right." She squeezed Noah's hand. "This young man was very brave, kept insisting we needed to come help his parents." "You were amazing," Nadia told Noah, kneeling to embrace him. "A true scientist, observing carefully and taking action when needed." "Like Mama Eleanor taught me," the boy replied solemnly. Then, with the resilience of childhood, he pointed to the fading glow in the creek. "Can we make it do that again sometime? It's the prettiest thing I ever saw." The adults laughed, tension finally breaking. Maybe for special occasions, Jesse promised. But right now, I think we all need rest. We have a home to rebuild. 1 month later, the Blackwood Ranch was transformed. The destroyed cabin had been replaced by a larger, sturdier home built with the help of many of the same townspeople who had once viewed them with suspicion and hostility. The barn stood repaired livestock once again filling the corral. Most significantly, the irrigation system had been fully restored, according to Eleanor's original designs though, with modifications to prevent another spectacular mineral reaction. Jesse stood on the porch watching as Nadia instructed a group of visiting scientists in the proper collection of water samples. Since the night of the Blackwood phenomenon, as newspapers had dubbed it, their ranch had become a center of scientific interest. Researchers from universities across the country had arrived to study the unique mineral properties of the creek water, confirming Eleanor's findings regarding its therapeutic potential. The territorial court had moved swiftly, thanks in part to Governor Osborne's personal interest in the case. Cornelius Wade had been convicted of multiple counts of murder conspiracy and fraud, sentenced to hang for his crimes. Claiborne, in exchange for his complete testimony, received a 20-year sentence in territorial prison. The Wade corporate empire was being dismantled, its assets seized and redistributed to the communities and individuals who had suffered under its predatory practices. Most gratifying to Jesse was Noah's continued recovery. The boy had blossomed in the weeks since their ordeal, his seizures completely gone, his speech now flowing easily and confidently. He had appointed himself assistant to both his father and Nadia, absorbing knowledge from each with equal enthusiasm. "Pa, no," Noah called now, running from the direction of the creek. "Sheriff Sawyer's coming, and he's got company." Sure enough, Sawyer was riding up the path, accompanied by a well-dressed woman Jesse didn't recognize. The sheriff had been a frequent visitor since that fateful night, helping with the rebuilding and establishing himself as a trusted friend to the family. "Morning, Blackwood," Sawyer greeted as he dismounted. "Hope we're not interrupting your scientific endeavors." "Never too busy for friends," Jesse assured him, stepping down from the porch to shake hands. "Who's your companion?" "Catherine Wells." The woman introduced herself, extending a gloved hand. "I represent the Department of the Interior. Governor Osborne suggested I visit your operation." Nadia joined them, wiping her hands on her apron. "The federal government is interested in our research." "Very much so," Ms. Wells confirmed, "particularly in light of the proven efficacy of the water treatments for certain neurological conditions. The department is considering establishing a medical research station here with your permission and cooperation, of course." Jesse and Nadia exchanged glances. "Eleanor would have wanted that," Jesse said. "Government oversight to ensure the benefits are widely available, not monopolized." "That's precisely our intention," Ms. Wells agreed. "With proper scientific validation and controlled distribution, the Blackwood treatments could help thousands." As they discussed the details, Noah tugged at Sawyer's sleeve. "Are you going to marry Aunt Martha?" he asked with childish directness. The sheriff coughed, color rising in his weathered cheeks. "Now where'd you get an idea like that, son?" "You bring her flowers every Sunday," Noah pointed out with impeccable logic, "and she makes you pie. That's what people do when they like each other." Jesse struggled to keep his expression neutral. Sawyer's increasing attention to Martha Garrison had indeed been noted by the adults, though no one had dared comment on it directly. "Well," Sawyer said, adjusting his hat to hide his embarrassment, "Martha and I are good friends. She was kind to me when others weren't." "She says you're a decent man who just needed to find his courage," Noah reported matter-of-factly, "and that you found it." The adults burst into laughter at Sawyer's discomfort, though there was kindness in it. "Out of the mouths of babes," Nadia remarked. "Martha's assessment seems accurate to me." Later that afternoon, as their visitors departed, Jesse found Nadia in Eleanor's garden, the small plot behind the house that had somehow survived the destruction. She was tending the rare blue flowers that had been Eleanor's special project, their delicate blooms more vibrant than ever in the fertile soil. "I've been thinking," he said, joining her in the careful work of weeding around the precious plants, "about making our arrangement more permanent." Nadia looked up, a question in her dark eyes. "We're already legally married, Jesse." "Yes, but that was for convenience, for protection." He met her gaze directly. "I'm talking about something real. Something chosen freely, not forced by circumstance." Her hands stilled in their work. "Are you proposing to me, Jesse Blackwood?" Inelegantly, perhaps, he admitted with a small smile. But yes, these past months have shown me that what began as necessity has become something else entirely, something I want to continue for the rest of our lives. Nadia was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said quietly, "What about Eleanor? Her memory is everywhere here." "Eleanor would want us to be happy," Jesse said with certainty. "She valued life growth moving forward. She wouldn't want us to live in shadows of what was lost. And Noah? Noah adores you. You've given him back his voice, his confidence. He's already begun to think of you as his mother." Nadia looked down at the blue flowers gently touching one delicate petal. "I never expected this when I stood on those gallows," she said softly. "To find a home, a family." "Is that a yes?" Jesse asked, his heart suddenly pounding. Her smile broke like sunrise. "Yes, Jesse Blackwood. I will marry you again, and properly this time." 2 weeks later, they stood together under an arch decorated with Eleanor's blue flowers. The ceremony combined elements of Christian tradition and Shoshone ritual, with Sawyer standing as Nadia's family representative. Judge Grant, humbled by his role in Wade's schemes and seeking redemption, officiated with genuine emotion. The entire town of Willow Creek attended along with visitors from surrounding communities, scientists who had come to study the water, and government representatives interested in the medical applications of the research. What had begun as a private ceremony had evolved into a community celebration and a public commitment to Eleanor's vision of healing and progress. Noah, resplendent in a new suit and beaming with pride, presented the rings at the appropriate moment. As Jesse slipped the simple gold band onto Nadia's finger, he felt a sense of completion, of rightness that transcended the complicated circumstances that had brought them together. "With this ring I thee wed," he said, the traditional words carrying the weight of all they had endured together. Not from necessity, but from choice. Not from convenience, but from love. Nadia's eyes shone as she repeated the vow, adding her own promise, "To honor the past while building our future. To protect what matters most, our family, our legacy, our love." After the celebration, as twilight painted the Wyoming sky in shades of lavender and gold, Jesse led Nadia and Noah to a secluded spot on their property, a small clearing he had discovered while rebuilding the irrigation system. According to Eleanor's final journal, which they had found in the hidden laboratory, this place held special significance. "Eleanor called it her sanctuary," Jesse explained as they entered the clearing. "She came here to think, to plan, to connect with the land." In the center of the clearing stood a small memorial stone he had placed there, engraved simply, "Eleanor Blackwood, scientist wife, mother visionary." Around the stone, in a perfect circle, grew the blue flowers she had cultivated, their luminescent quality enhanced in the fading light. The flowers contained concentrated traces of the same minerals found in the creek. Nadia observed, her scientific mind never entirely at rest. "That's why they glow at dusk." "Are they magic flowers, Pa?" Noah asked, crouching to examine them more closely. "Your mother would say their science so advanced it looks like magic," Jesse replied. "She created them through years of careful breeding and irrigation with the mineral water." Nadia knelt beside the memorial stone, placing a small bouquet of wildflowers at its base. "Thank you, Eleanor," she said softly, "for your brilliance, your courage, and for the family you created. I promise to honor your legacy and care for those you loved." Jesse placed his hand on her shoulder, overcome with gratitude for this extraordinary woman who had entered their lives through such unlikely circumstances. Noah, sensing the emotional moment, came to stand between them, one hand holding each of theirs. "We're a family now," the boy said with simple certainty. "All of us." "All of us," Jesse agreed, including Eleanor's memory in that affirmation. 1 year later, the Blackwood Ranch had evolved into something Eleanor could never have imagined, yet would surely have approved. The simple homestead had expanded to include a small research facility where scientists worked alongside Shoshone healers, combining modern techniques with indigenous knowledge. The irrigation system now supplied the entire valley with the mineral-rich water, creating unprecedented agricultural abundance. Most precious to Jesse, however, was the family that had formed from tragedy and hope. Noah, now completely recovered and thriving, had become a bright, curious 7-year-old with his mother's scientific mind and his father's steady heart. Nadia had grown into her role as both wife and scientific director of the Eleanor Blackwood Foundation, her initial reserve giving way to a quiet confidence that commanded respect from visitors and colleagues alike. And now there was a new joy, twin daughters just 3 months old, with Nadia's dark hair and Jesse's blue eyes. They had named them Sarah after Nadia's lost sister and Ellie in honor of Eleanor. On a warm summer evening, Jesse sat beside Eleanor's memorial stone, the blue flowers glowing softly around him in the gathering dusk. It had become his custom to visit occasionally to share the developments in their lives, to maintain the connection with the woman who had made everything possible. "You'd be proud, Ellie," he said quietly. "The foundation is thriving. Nadia's latest paper on the mineral compounds has been accepted by the Medical Journal of Boston. And Noah, you wouldn't believe how he's grown. Smart as a whip, just like you." He touched the stone gently. "Thank you for the gifts you left us, not just the water, but the chance to love again, to build something that matters." As he spoke, Noah appeared at the edge of the clearing, carrying one of the blue flowers carefully in his small hands. "Pa, can I talk to Mama Eleanor too?" "Of course, son. She'd like that." Noah knelt beside the stone, placing his flower alongside the others. "Hello, Mama Eleanor," he said solemnly. "I'm learning all about science, just like you and Mama Nadia, and I'm helping with the babies too." Jesse watched his son with a full heart as the boy continued his innocent conversation with the memory of his first mother. When Noah had finished, he looked up at Jesse with those wise, solemn eyes that sometimes seemed to hold understanding beyond his years. "Pa," he said, "Mama Eleanor's water doesn't just make our bodies better, does it? It healed our hearts too." Jesse put his arm around his son's shoulder, struck by the simple truth of the child's observation. "You're right, Noah. That's exactly what it did." Together they walked back toward the house, where Nadia waited on the porch with the twins, her face lighting up at the sight of them. The blue flowers glowed behind them, Eleanor's living legacy illuminating the path home.